The storm erased the road ahead, turning asphalt into a river of shadows. Rain struck the windshield like bullets, and thunder rolled across the empty Midwest sky. Inside, a massive Kenworth truck sat a man who had survived 55 years by trusting one rule: never stop for anyone on a dark road. But that night, fate stood soaked and trembling on the shoulder of the highway, and all it asked of him was a single moment of mercy. Most lives don't change in grand halls or under bright lights. They change quietly, when no one is watching. Sometimes destiny doesn't knock. It stands in the rain and waits to see if you'll slow down. This is the story of Roger, a man who believed he had already lost everything worth keeping. And this is the story of a family who believed the world had forgotten them. They met on a road no one remembers. In a storm, no one would survive alone. Roger had spent more nights on the highway than inside any house he owned. At 55, his body was strong but worn, shaped by decades of long hauls and longer silences. His hands were thick with calluses, his knuckles permanently scarred from years of tightening bolts, loading cargo, and gripping a steering wheel for hours without rest. He liked driving at night. The darkness didn't judge him. It didn't remind him of birthdays missed or arguments never resolved. It didn't whisper his wife's name when he walked into an empty room. 5 years earlier, cancer had taken her quietly, without drama or fairness. Roger had stood beside her hospital bed, holding a hand that grew colder by the minute, promising things he didn't know how to keep. When she was gone, the house they shared became unbearable. Every room echoed. Every object accused him of staying alive. So he left. He told people he loved the road. The truth was simpler. The road didn't hurt. That night, Roger was hauling a full load of lumber north, pushing to make good time before dawn. The storm had other plans. Rain hammered down in sheets so thick the headlights barely pierced through. The wipers moved at full speed, but visibility shrank to a narrow tunnel of light. The diesel engine roared beneath him, steady and powerful, the only thing he trusted anymore. Roger leaned forward, eyes narrowed, shoulders tense. "Just get through the night," he muttered. He didn't know the night had already decided otherwise. The headlights caught movement ahead. Roger's first instinct was irritation. Another deer, he thought, or maybe debris blown onto the road. But as he eased off the accelerator, his irritation turned into unease. They weren't animals. They were people, 4 of them, walking single file along the narrow shoulder, bent forward against the wind, soaked so completely they looked like ghosts pulled from the storm itself. Roger's jaw tightened, his instincts flared, sharp and urgent. Don't stop. He had heard the stories at truck stops across the country. Lonely roads, fake distress, men who used families as bait to hijack rigs or rob drivers who got too soft-hearted. He'd survived because he didn't stop. His foot pressed harder on the accelerator. Then one of the figures turned. A child, small, thin, barely tall enough to be seen above the ditch. The boy didn't wave or shout. He just stared into the oncoming lights, eyes wide with pure terror, clinging to the leg of the man in front of him, as if the world might tear him away at any second. Roger felt it, a sharp, physical jolt in his chest. A memory flashed through his mind, his own son, small once, reaching for his hand in a crowded parking lot years ago. Roger swore loudly. His instincts screamed at him to keep going, but his foot moved on its own. He slammed the brakes. The air brakes hissed violently as the massive truck fought against momentum. Tires screamed against wet asphalt, water spraying in every direction as the rig slowed to a stop. Roger's heart pounded so hard he could hear it over the engine. He brought the truck to a halt roughly 50 yards ahead of the figures, rain still pounding relentlessly around him. For a long moment, he just sat there, breathing, regretting, questioning every decision that had led him to this second. He rolled down the passenger window just enough for his voice to carry, keeping the engine running and his right hand close to the gear shift. Through the side mirror, he saw movement. The adult male broke from the group and ran toward the cab, slipping in the mud, nearly falling twice before reaching the door. Roger's eyes scanned him quickly. No weapon, no aggressive movement, just panic. "Sir, please," the man shouted over the rain. "I don't want money, I swear. My kids can't walk anymore. My little girl is sick. We just need a ride to the next town, anywhere with a roof. Please." The man's voice cracked completely. There was no threat in it, no deception, only the sound of a father who had run out of options. Roger closed his eyes briefly. He knew this moment would follow him either way. With a heavy sigh, he reached over and unlocked the passenger door. "Get them in, fast," he said gruffly. And just like that, the storm stopped being outside the truck. The passenger door swung open with a metallic creak, and the man scrambled up into the cab, nearly slipping on the wet steps. Roger could smell the rain on him immediately, cold, muddy, mixed with sweat and fear. "Thank you, sir. Thank you," the man kept saying, breathless, his voice breaking apart as if the words themselves were struggling to survive. Roger nodded once, not trusting himself to speak yet. He gestured sharply toward the back. "Get the others. Hurry." The man turned and waved frantically. The woman and the two children ran forward, fighting the wind, their shoes sinking into the mud at the shoulder of the road. The little boy stumbled, and the woman nearly fell, trying to keep both children upright. Roger's jaw clenched. He climbed halfway out of his seat and pulled the interior handle to open the rear door. One by one, they climbed up into the truck, awkward and trembling, hands slipping on the metal steps. The woman went first, lifting the girl with surprising strength for someone so exhausted. The child was limp, her head resting heavily against her mother's shoulder. Her face was flushed in a way Roger didn't like, too warm, too still. Then came the boy, teeth chattering so hard Roger could hear it over the rain. His pants were soaked to the knee, and his jacket was too thin for a night like this. Last came the man, again closing the door behind him with shaking hands. The cab suddenly felt very small. Roger turned the heater dial all the way up, the fan roaring as warm air began to flood the space. Steam rose from their clothes, fogging the windows almost instantly. For a moment, no one spoke. The storm continued outside, but inside the cab, there was only the sound of breathing, uneven, exhausted, afraid. Roger glanced at them one by one, without turning his head too far. Years on the road had taught him how to observe without staring. The woman sat behind the passenger seat, rocking the little girl gently. Her hair was plastered to her face, dark and stringy with rain. Her hands moved instinctively, rubbing the child's arms, whispering something too soft for Roger to hear. The boy sat beside her, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around himself like a shield. His eyes darted around the cab, the dashboard, the curtains, the ceiling, as if he were trying to memorize this place in case it disappeared. The man stood awkwardly near the door, unsure where to sit, unsure what he was allowed to touch. Roger finally cleared his throat. "Sit down," he said, jerking his chin toward the passenger seat. "You're not in trouble." The man hesitated, then lowered himself onto the edge of the seat like someone afraid of breaking something expensive. "I'm Roger," Roger said gruffly, pulling the truck back onto the road. "Where you folks headed?" The man swallowed hard. "My name's Bradley," he said. "That's my wife, Adele. The kids are Timmy and Sophie." Adele looked up at the sound of her name and gave a small nod, her eyes tired but alert. Up close, Roger could see how young she really was, late 20s maybe, and how exhaustion had aged her far beyond that. "How old is the girl?" Roger asked, nodding toward Sophie. 6, Adele answered softly. She's had a fever since yesterday. We thought walking might help her cool down, but her voice trailed off, heavy with guilt. Roger's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Walking. In this storm. He didn't comment. He just reached into the storage compartment above the windshield and pulled out a thick wool blanket he'd kept there for emergencies. "Wrap her in this," he said, handing it back. "And you?" He pointed at Timmy. "Sit closer to the heater." Timmy obeyed instantly, inching forward until his knees nearly touched the dashboard vent. Roger reached again and grabbed his stainless steel thermos and a crumpled paper bag. "There's hot coffee in there," he said, "and sandwiches. Not fancy, but they'll do." Bradley stared at the bag like it was something sacred. I couldn't," he began. Roger shot him a look that ended the conversation. "Eat. Kids first." Bradley opened the bag with trembling fingers. Inside were 2 thick sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Without hesitation, he broke one in half and handed the larger portion to Adele, who carefully tore it into smaller pieces for the children. Only after they were eating did Bradley take a few small bites for himself. Roger watched the reflection in the windshield, something tightening painfully in his chest. He'd seen plenty of men on the road, loud, selfish, quick to complain. This man was different. Hunger gnawed at him, yet he put his family first without thinking. "Where were you walking to?" Roger asked quietly. Bradley hesitated, then answered. "Apple Valley, about 150 miles north." Roger let out a low whistle. "In this weather? You wouldn't have made it?" Bradley nodded slowly. "We know, but we didn't have a choice." The words settled heavy in the cab. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, 5 strangers shared warmth, fear, and the fragile beginning of something none of them could yet name. The truck rolled steadily through the storm, its massive tires cutting twin paths through the blackened asphalt. Rain lashed against the windshield like thrown gravel, but Roger drove as if the weather barely existed. His eyes stayed forward, calm, practiced. The kind of calm earned only through years of long nights and lonely roads. Behind him, the cab had changed. What had begun as a silent shelter had slowly turned into something warmer, not just from the heater, but from the fragile sense of safety that had crept in without anyone noticing. Sophie had fallen asleep. Her breathing was shallow, but even now, her small body wrapped tightly in the wool blanket. Adele held her close, one arm curved protectively around her daughter's back, as if loosening her grip might cause the child to vanish. Timmy sat upright, chewing slowly, forcing himself to eat every bite as though he understood that food was no longer guaranteed. His eyes drooped, but he fought sleep, afraid that if he closed them, this ride, this mercy, might end. Bradley sat forward, hands folded tightly in his lap, staring at the road through the windshield. He looked like a man watching his past disappear mile by mile, unsure whether the future ahead would be kinder or crueler. Roger finally broke the quiet. "You don't look like people who make bad choices," he said, his voice low and steady. "So tell me what went wrong." Bradley swallowed. For a long moment, Roger thought he wouldn't answer. Then the words came, slow at first, as if Bradley had to dig them out of someplace buried deep. "We used to have a normal life," Bradley said. "Nothing special. A small apartment, a steady job, plans, the boring kind of happiness people don't appreciate until it's gone." Adele closed her eyes at his words, her jaw tightening. "I worked maintenance at a manufacturing plant," Bradley continued. "Been there almost 10 years. When they shut it down, they promised severance, retraining, help finding work. Promises are easy when you don't have to keep them." Roger nodded once. He'd heard versions of this story before, different names, same ending. "By the time the checks stopped coming," Bradley said, "the bills didn't." He paused, running a hand over his face. "We burned through our savings faster than we thought. Rent went unpaid. Then the eviction notice came. Just like that. Timmy looked up sharply. "You said we were going on an adventure," the boy said quietly. Bradley flinched. "I didn't want you scared," he said, turning back to his son. "I thought, if I could just get us somewhere else, somewhere with work, things would turn around." Roger glanced at Timmy in the mirror. "How old are you, kid?" "9, Timmy replied. Roger grunted softly. "Old enough to understand more than people think." Timmy nodded, his eyes fixed on the rain. "We slept in the car for a while," Adele added, her voice barely above a whisper, "until the car broke down too." The cab seemed to tighten around those words. "No family?" Roger asked. Bradley shook his head. "My parents passed years ago. It's complicated." That was all she needed to say. Roger drove on in silence, the engine humming like a heartbeat beneath the weight of their story. He thought of his own past, nights spent in truck stops, meals eaten alone, years passed without anyone waiting at home. He had chosen that life, believing freedom meant not being tied to anyone. But listening to them now, he wondered if he'd misunderstood freedom entirely. The road curved ahead, illuminated briefly by the glow of passing headlights. A sign flashed by. Mason Ridge, 32 miles. Roger exhaled slowly. There was a hospital there, a real one. He reached for the radio, turned the volume down even lower. "How's the girl's fever?" he asked. Adele touched Sophie's forehead, her brow furrowing. "Still hot." Roger made a decision without announcing it. "We're going to Mason Ridge," he said. "Hospital's open all night." Bradley turned toward him, panic and gratitude colliding in his expression. "We don't have insurance," he said quickly. "We don't have money." Roger shrugged. "Doctors don't check wallets before they check pulses." Adele's eyes filled instantly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." Roger said nothing. He didn't trust his voice. Miles passed. Rain softened to a drizzle. The storm began to loosen its grip. Timmy finally fell asleep, his head resting against his mother's arm. Bradley stared at his children, his face breaking in a way Roger had only seen in men pushed past their limits, when hope becomes too heavy to hold alone. "I keep thinking this is my fault," Bradley said quietly. "Like if I'd worked harder, planned better, they wouldn't be here." Roger kept his eyes on the road. "Life doesn't ask permission before it hits you," he said, "and it doesn't hit fair." Bradley nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," Roger continued, "you didn't give up. You kept walking. That counts." Bradley let out a shaky breath, something loosening inside his chest. Ahead, the lights of Mason Ridge began to glow faintly through the mist. Small, distant, but real. Roger felt it then. This wasn't just a ride. This was a crossing from desperation toward possibility, and none of them would come out the other side unchanged. The hospital lights cut through the darkness like a promise. As Roger guided the truck off the highway and into the emergency entrance of Mason Ridge General, the world outside seemed to pause. Rain tapped gently against the windshield now, no longer violent, almost respectful, as if even the storm understood what was at stake. The truck hissed to a stop. For a moment, no one moved. Adele tightened the blanket around Sophie, her body rigid with fear. Bradley's hands trembled as he reached for the door handle, then hesitated, as if stepping out might somehow undo everything. Roger killed the engine and turned in his seat. "She's going to be okay," he said, not softly, not loudly, but with the kind of certainty that steadies shaking hands. Bradley nodded, though his eyes betrayed him. They climbed down from the cab together. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. The smell of disinfectant and wet pavement filled Roger's lungs as automatic doors slid open ahead of them. Inside, the hospital was a different universe. White walls, polished floors, the hum of machines and quiet footsteps. Voices low, controlled, the language of people trained to stand between life and loss. A nurse spotted them immediately. "She's burning up," Adele said before the nurse could ask. her voice cracking. "She's been like this since yesterday." The nurse's expression changed instantly, professional calm snapping into swift action. "Let's get her inside," she said, already guiding Adele toward a gurney. "How old?" "6. Another nurse appeared, lifting Sophie gently from Adele's arms. The child whimpered weakly, her eyes fluttering but never fully opening. Bradley stood frozen, watching his daughter disappear down the hallway. Roger placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go," he said. "They'll tell you where to wait." The man nodded and followed, his steps unsteady. Roger remained near the entrance, suddenly unsure of his place. He wasn't family. He wasn't anyone, really. Just a driver who had stopped. A security guard glanced at him. "You with them?" Roger hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." The word surprised him with how easily it came. He followed them into the waiting area, rows of plastic chairs, a television murmuring to no one, the faint scent of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Adele sat down hard, hands clasped together as if in prayer. Timmy leaned against her, eyes wide, absorbing everything. Bradley paced. Minutes stretched, then hours. Time in hospitals didn't move the way it did on the road. It thickened, slowed, pressed in on you until every second felt heavy enough to crush hope. Roger watched families come and go, some relieved, some broken. He'd seen danger before, wrecks and blood on highways, but this quiet waiting was worse. A doctor finally appeared. "Bradley Turner?" the doctor asked. Bradley nearly ran to him. "How is she?" Adele asked, already standing. The doctor smiled gently. "She's stable. Severe dehydration and infection, but you got her here in time." Adele's knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Roger hadn't stepped forward and caught her arm. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you." Roger said nothing. His throat was tight. The doctor continued. "We'll keep her overnight. IV fluids, antibiotics. She's a tough little girl." Timmy exhaled so hard it sounded like a gasp. "Can I see her?" he asked. "Soon," the doctor replied. "Let her rest first." Relief washed over the room like sunlight after weeks of rain. But relief, Roger knew, never lasted long. A hospital administrator approached next, clipboard in hand. "We need to discuss paperwork," she said gently. "Insurance, billing." Bradley's face fell instantly. "I told you," he whispered to Adele. "We don't have anything." Roger watched the fear return, sharper now, more humiliating. It was one thing to face danger, another to face numbers you couldn't pay. He stood. "I'll take care of it," he said. 4 heads turned toward him. Bradley's mouth opened, then closed. "You don't have to." Roger cut him off with a raised hand. "She's a kid. That's enough reason." The administrator blinked, surprised. "I'll need your information, sir." Roger nodded. They walked toward the desk. As Roger signed his name, something strange happened. Something heavier than fear, heavier even than relief. For the first time in years, he felt needed. Not useful, not polite, needed. Later that night, when Sophie slept peacefully under clean white sheets and Adele sat beside her bed, Roger stood quietly at the doorway. "You saved us," Adele said softly. Roger shook his head. "No," he said. "I just stopped." But as he turned to leave, he knew the truth. Stopping had changed everything. Morning arrived without ceremony. No sunrise through windows, no birdsong. Just the steady hum of hospital life and the quiet beep of machines, reminding everyone that time, here, was measured differently. Roger sat alone in the cafeteria, a paper cup of coffee cooling between his hands. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of Sophie being wheeled away, small and burning with fever, and the way Adele's face had collapsed when the doctor said billing. He wasn't rich. He wasn't even comfortable. Truckers didn't make heroic money, no matter what movies said. They made enough to survive, sometimes enough to save, and if they were careful, enough to help someone once in a while. Roger stared into the coffee. Once in a while. The weight of what he'd done pressed down on him now. Not regret. Something deeper. Responsibility. A voice broke his thoughts. "Mr. Harris?" Roger looked up. The hospital administrator stood there again, clipboard tucked under her arm, expression softer than the night before. "Yes, I wanted to update you," she said. "Your card went through. We've arranged a charity care adjustment for the remainder. The family won't be responsible for the balance." Roger let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good," he said simply. She hesitated. "You don't see many people do what you did," she added, "especially for strangers." Roger shrugged. "Strangers yesterday," he said. "Not today." She smiled, then walked away. Roger finished his coffee and headed back toward Sophie's room. Inside, the light was gentler now, pale morning filtering through half-drawn blinds. Sophie lay still but peaceful, color slowly returning to her cheeks. The IV line rose and fell softly with each breath. Adele slept in the chair beside the bed, exhaustion finally overpowering fear. Her hand rested lightly on Sophie's arm, unwilling to let go even in sleep. Timmy sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing with a pen he must have borrowed from a nurse. When he saw Roger, he jumped to his feet. "She's better," he whispered loudly, then winced. "I mean, she's better." Roger smiled. "That's good news." Timmy studied him for a moment, then asked the question Roger knew was coming. "Why did you help us?" Roger leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "Because someone helped me once," he said. Timmy's eyes widened. "When?" Roger hesitated, then decided the boy deserved honesty. "Long time ago. I was about your age. My dad left. My mom worked 2 jobs. We almost lost our house." Timmy listened like this was the most important story in the world. "One night," Roger continued, "a neighbor noticed our lights were out, brought us groceries, paid our electric bill, never asked for anything back." "Did you see him again?" Timmy asked. Roger nodded. "Every day, but he never talked about it, just waved." Timmy thought for a second. "So you're doing the same thing?" Roger smiled faintly. "Maybe." Bradley entered the room quietly, stopping short when he saw Roger. "I was looking for you," he said. They stepped into the hallway. Bradley rubbed his hands together, nerves returning. "I spoke to the social worker," he said. "They're helping us find a shelter for now, and there's a job training program, maybe even work." Roger nodded, pleased but unsurprised. Systems worked better when someone was finally paying attention. Bradley swallowed. "I don't know how to repay you." Roger met his eyes. "You don't," he said. "You just don't waste the chance." Bradley's face crumpled, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way men break when they're finally allowed to. "I won't," he said. "I swear." Roger believed him. They stood there for a moment. 2 men bound not by blood, but by a single decision made on a rainy road. Later that day, Roger returned to his truck. The cab felt different now, emptier somehow, yet heavier with meaning. He sat behind the wheel, hands resting where they always had, but his heart felt changed. Before starting the engine, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Timmy had slipped it to him before he left. It was a drawing, a big truck, a small family, a stick figure man standing between them, arms stretched wide. Underneath, written in uneven letters, "Thank you for stopping." Roger stared at it for a long time. Then he turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, and for the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel so empty. The highway welcomed Roger back like an old companion. Miles of asphalt stretched ahead, pale under the early afternoon sky. The storm long gone. The truck settled into its familiar rhythm, engine humming steady and deep, a sound Roger had trusted for most of his adult life. Yet something was different. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. Roger drove for hours without turning on the radio. No music, no voices, just the road and his thoughts, and the folded drawing tucked safely in the pocket above the dashboard. He passed the spot where he had first seen them. The shoulder looked ordinary now, dry, quiet. No sign that a family had once stood there, soaked and desperate, waving at passing cars that never slowed. Roger eased off the accelerator. He pulled over. Stepping out of the truck, he felt the wind brush against his face. The world moved on without pause, cars rushing past, drivers focused on destinations that mattered only to them. Roger stared at the empty stretch of road. If I hadn't stopped, the thought settled heavy in his chest. He climbed back into the cab and continued driving, carrying the weight of that truth with him. Days passed, then weeks. Life resumed its patterns. Deliveries made, fuel stops counted, sleep grabbed in narrow bunks under flickering lights. But something followed Roger now, invisible and persistent. Awareness. He noticed more things. A woman crying quietly in a diner booth. A man asleep on a bench with his shoes lined neatly beside him. A child gripping a parent's hand too tightly. Once, he bought an extra meal and left it on a table without explanation. Another time, he paid for someone's fuel and drove off before they could ask why. He never told anyone about the family. Kindness, he'd learned, didn't need witnesses. One evening, months later, Roger pulled into a truck stop just outside Cedar Junction. The neon sign buzzed faintly as dusk settled in. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and fried onions wrapped around him like a memory. He slid into a booth, ordered his usual, and unfolded a newspaper someone had left behind. A small article caught his eye. Local man opens second chance auto shop. The photo showed a familiar face, Bradley, thinner, cleaner, standing beside a modest garage with fresh paint and a hand-painted sign. Adele stood next to him, Sophie on her hip, Timmy grinning with a gap-toothed smile. Roger read every word. After months of hardship, the Turner family credits community support and a single act of kindness for helping them rebuild their lives. Roger folded the paper slowly. His chest tightened, not with pride, but with something gentler, something earned. That night, as he lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, Roger thought about roads, how they didn't just take you places, they tested you. Every mile was a question, every stop an answer. Years later, when Roger finally left the road for good, he carried very little with him, a duffel bag, a lifetime of miles, and one small drawing, edges worn soft with time. When people asked why he'd driven so long, why he'd never settled down, he gave them the same answer every time. I was waiting to stop somewhere that mattered. He had. And somewhere, not far from a rainy highway, a family slept warm, not because a man drove a truck, but because he chose to stop. Moral of the story: you don't have to change the whole world to change a life. Sometimes all it takes is noticing and stopping when others keep going. If this story moved you, remember, real strength is shown in quiet choices. Subscribe to Momentum Stories for more true emotional stories about faith, hope, and the power of human kindness, because the next story that changes someone's life might begin with you.